Welcome back. Still tuned into your home of humanitarian journalism with myself, Salalo Makwidira. The time is 11 minutes past 9, and we're going to be shifting our focus now to climate change and environmental affairs. We're going to be discussing a very, very important topic. And I think, climate change is something that affects every one of us and our future generations. I think recently, this past week, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the climate change bill into law, marking a significant step in South Africa's efforts to combat climate change. This new law mandates carbon budgets, sets forth adaptation and mitigation actions, and aims to align South Africa's climate policies with global goals set under the Paris Agreement. And to help us unpack the implications of this new legislation, we're joined by Sherelee Odayar, an oil and gas campaigner from Greenpeace Africa. Sherelee, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Salam Media.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to the listeners.
I think first and foremost, if you can give us just your initial thoughts and overview on the signing of the climate change bill into law and just how significant, it is for the development of South Africa's environmental policy and landscape.
So, well, we definitely welcome the signing of the bill. It's definitely a step in the right direction to addressing the climate crisis globally. South Africa is one of the highest, or the highest emitter of carbon emissions of greenhouse gases in Africa, and somewhere in the top 20 around the world. So it's definitely on us to reduce our carbon emissions, and this bill will really help us do that by it has the potential to significantly strengthen and expedite mitigation and adaptation actions. And it can do this by setting a clear legal framework, setting specific targets, improving data and monitoring, and also ensuring, coordinated cohesiveness amongst government departments as well.
And I think, if there's one thing that really stood out for me when it comes to this new piece of legislation is the concept of carbon budgets, and how, they will work under this new act. If you can just give us, a brief explanation of what a carbon budget entails and what it essentially means, particularly for big companies who are the biggest emitters and polluters.
So it mainly means that that they will have a minimum amount of carbon that they can emit, and of course there will be a legal framework as well. So they cannot exceed carbon budget. So it will be determined by the Minister of Forestries, Fisheries and Environment. So that ministry will determine meaningful penalties for companies that exceed their carbon budgets, um, with also the potential of a higher carbon tax rate as a penalty as well.
And also, this bill, kind of allows companies to exceed their carbon budgets if they pay a higher carbon tax. Do you think, this is an effective way to regulate emissions, or does it undermine the goals of the act in exchange for profits?
Yeah, so we don't necessarily agree with the carbon credit uh, aspect that they have there, because it will give companies, especially the very large companies that can afford to do this, leeway to emit more carbon. So it's one of the things that we disagree with. Yeah.
And you touched a bit on mitigation and adaptation actions. The act includes mechanism and penalties. The act includes both mitigation and adaptation actions. Can you elaborate on the importance of a dual approach in addressing climate change, particularly in South Africa, and given its unique social economic challenges and also its unique environmental impact and positioning, particularly on the continent?
Yeah, so for South Africa, we've seen that there's been, we've really been victims of the climate crisis. There's been extreme weather events. We've seen in the past 5 years of climate catastrophes. We've seen this earlier in KZN, in the Eastern Cape, and recently in Cape Town, where there's been storms and flooding. And adaptation is very important. So, the bill outlines national goals and creates climate scenarios to assess vulnerabilities. And it also will help in developing a national adaptation strategy and a plan to manage adaptation. It also provides support and funding for change responses, and offering guidance and governance framework for planning and implementing plans, both national and provincial level.
I think one concern, particularly for South Africa, is the fact that we have all of these really on paper bills and acts that are some of the best in the world when it comes to their crafting, but the issue is always implementation. What do you foresee would be the main challenges in implementing this act effectively?
One of the main challenges will be industry. Definitely industries that rely heavily on carbon-based energy systems. So there'll probably be a lot of pushback around that, and the industries itself may face some challenges in trying to reduce their carbon emissions. Yeah, and also the success of the bill will also largely depend on how effectively its provisions are implemented and enforced. And that will require, a lot of political will. So the government definitely has to come into play with that.
All right. I think we're going to leave it there, Sherelee. Thank you so much for giving us your time and giving us your reaction to the climate change bill. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, but that was Sherelee Odayar. She's coming to us from organization, Greenpeace Africa, and she was giving us insight on their reaction to the climate change bill that was signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa. And I think just like any other bill here in South Africa, the issue is not about the craftsmanship of the bill, but rather the implementation of the bill. And I think it's going to be interesting going forward to see just how effective this bill is going to be when it comes to mitigating the climate change crisis in South Africa. And I think, we are one country that can confidently say, we are starting to see the repercussions of climate change. I mean, if you can see almost year in, year out, we've been having all kinds of floods in our coastal areas, particularly, and also those are fires, the wildfires that rock the country continuously, causing extensive damage and cost of life to the people that are near them. So I think for South Africans, climate change and its implications is no longer a theory. It's something that is a lived reality for many of us here in the country. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be having one of my favorite segments is hashtag Fired Up with personal excellence mentor and CEO of Africa Muslims Agency, Imran Chunara. This hour of News and Views is sponsored by Africa Muslims Agency. Africa Muslims Agency, a beacon of hope to communities for 35 years and beyond. Fired Up after this.